happening, gang? Back live in the Secret Stash. Tracking down some cool local people, talking about some cool local stuff, and leaving you a little better than how we found you. And in the studio today, I'm flanked by my man, Jeremy Beck, mortgage planner of the Greenhouse Group. What's a mortgage planner, Jer? Why do you call yourself such a fancy word? Aren't you just a guy that gets people loans?
Well, it's a good point, and one of the lessons that I'm going to talk about today has more to do with this. But the basic idea is that we don't just have you fill out a form, do the numbers, and hand you a piece of paper with a rate on it. Our goal is to take the time to really get to know what's important to you about the money, about the time frames, about everything that's important in the loan process, and make sure that we craft a financial plan designed specifically for you. So it's a little bit more than, swinging a rate.
And perfect segue for looking at your year, looking ahead in 2016, if this is something that you might want to do, looking to maybe buy, get into a home, maybe sell the one that you got. 2015 was a year of a lot of lessons, and we shrunk down the 7 best ones we could for you, and we're sharing with you not only what happened, but how to apply them for a successful campaign ahead. We talked about timing things in the first segment, like how seasons are kind of behaving more normal in the real estate pattern, and how trying to time the market with rates can actually hurt you when you're trying to get financing inside the table. But what about the cost of, let's just say, waiting, for example? So let's say you're a buyer. I know there's a lot of reports that there's a lot of idle hands right now. Yep. Millennials, a lot of people that are sort of, I guess you could even argue, trying to time the market.
Sure.
So talk to us about that.
Yeah, it's almost a subcomponent of timing the market, right? Waiting to buy. And a lot of times, we talked about this on previous shows, actually, with backed up by statistical evidence. So the math is where I find this interesting. I meet a lot of people who say, well, I'm going to wait for prices to come down. I'm going to wait for rates to come down before I buy, or whatever that conversation is. I think for the most part, if you open a paper, you look at the Fed, like you hinted towards before, the trend is upward on rates. So it's almost hard to argue that rates are going to go down. Maybe they're going to stay flat for a little bit, but most likely they're going to go up, right? If we can all agree on that, then there's some interesting components about waiting. Jess, what have you seen in the housing market over the last year? Have prices continued to increase, gone down, flat?
Well, this is actually, I joked, I teased about it at the top. I mean, if the number one reason why Chargers don't want to leave is because of our awesome fans and the base, and I'm going to go in a whole segment about that.
Sure.
Number two, man, San Diego as a real estate market has been steady grinding.
That's awesome.
So players, are probably sitting pretty good right now as long as they've had their home, just at least for the last, 2 or 3 years. I mean, we've had, if you look at the chart, it's had little blips of price, but for the most part, man, it's been starting low and ending high. We actually had a peak in the middle of the year this year at about $549,000 for median price.
Wow.
And we're ending right now the year at $539, so just ever so slightly off. So, man, the prices are crazy right now.
Good. So that's the conversation then. So if you're on the side and you're saying, I'm going to wait until this becomes more affordable for me, let's look at the math on that. Let's assume that, for example, maybe the purchase price of your target home doesn't go up at all.
Okay.
I just heard you say it's probably going to, or at least that's the trend. But let's say it doesn't at all, and interest rates rise only 0.25%.
So you're talking about for the 2016 campaign, the house that you're looking at is flat. Doesn't go up.
Right.
Okay.
And so this is the lesson that we saw, the mistake that we saw people make in 2015.
Right.
Is if it goes up even 0.25% on a $400,000 loan.
So from 4 to 4 1/4, which is totally reasonable. As a matter of fact, I think it's already happening right now.
Right. I did it 3.75 to 4.
Okay.
And that's $43 a month. It's not a ton, but it's $15,000 over the life of your loan that you would spend. So you end up getting the house at the same price, but you spend more per month and more over the life of the loan because of potentially waiting and increasing rates.
Well, not only that.
Even if the house doesn't go up in price.
But not only that, though, but let's just say that house that you've been watching, that you want to buy, that doesn't go up in price, is at the tippy top of what you can afford.
Yep.
Well, if it goes up that 0.25%, how much of an effect is that going to have on your purchase power?
Yeah. Well, if you get a pre-approval with me, you could probably still afford it because we overinflate that pre-approval to make sure you can.
Just as long as you don't piss them off and send them to the next guy for overinflating the pre-approval.
But maybe that's not how it goes elsewhere.
Yeah.
And just for fun, I did the numbers at increasing 1%.
Okay.
So, and that's totally viable based on the conversations we've had on past shows. That's $234 a month on the same loan, same home. if the rates go up 1%, it's $234 a month more in cost. That's $84K over the life of the loan. Huge expenditure.
But a lot of people don't own their homes for 30 years, right? I mean, so,
Okay.
so while that number is kind of tricky to sort of, what's that kind of mean? I'm going to try to cram that sort of into my decision-making process. Where that rubber meets that road, though, is with affordability.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say it goes up that point, or even the quarter point or whatever. So what's that going to do to my purchase power?
Yeah, so at $234 a month, that's dropping your purchase power by about $50,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's the whole percent up.
Yep.
And that was at what price point were you playing that, Mike?
That was $500,000 purchase price.
Wow.
Right here in the heart of San Diego.
That's 10% drop right there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were out there shopping for $500, rate goes up by a rather innocuous 1%, because historically that's still incredible, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're just now all of a sudden demoted to looking at $450,000 homes.
Great perspective from the real estate side, right? You got a buyer out there shopping, and now they can't even afford the places they were looking at.
And that's the interesting thing about it. Like I mentioned before, I mean, so just a couple numbers. Looking back at the 2015 campaign in review, I mean, man, we started out. Well, I'll even go back even further to make this point even more dramatic. Go back to this time 2013. So that's 2 years ago, right? So if you think about the market in terms of rates, yeah, maybe they danced a little bit, but for the most part, it's been kind of homogenous over the last 2 years. Would you not agree?
Sure.
They kind of came down a little bit. I mean, there was some really sexy rates down to like the threes for a while, but for the most part, so, everything else. But 2 years ago, the median home price was $390,000.
That's crazy.
$390,000. So this is the thing, like you hear sometimes, like we even talked about here, that renters are kind of like, I don't know, man, it's kind of overinflated. And from an affordability perspective, I couldn't agree with you more, because it's expensive to buy a house right now, man.
Yeah.
You compute that math backwards. And actually, I'm going to tease this out too. If that's you right now and you're listening to this live, you're not going to want to miss the last segment we're going to talk about. Rents are going to literally knock you off your stool. So I'll leave that tease and we'll come back to this point later.
Yeah.
But from end of 2013, $390,000. So in the last 2 years, if you just would have been that dumb knucklehead who threw his name on something, whatever rate you would have got back then, which I'm sure at $390 you were like, oh my God, I can't afford this, right? You would have walked into $149,000.
Yeah. We have clients that have done it and then bought up. What I'll say is, you asked me about mortgage planning, and this is really a critical thing. Sometimes I get that call from someone who says, I want to buy, I just don't know where to start. That's one of our hugest values to our clients, is that we have an opportunity for them to come in for free, get an hour of consultation, and typically, I can see even some of the worst case scenarios, we can get someone buying in 6 to 12 months, no matter where they are right now, just with some simple steps.
Speaking of simple too, I mean, that's really, because you look at the average, we're talking about numbers, right? So annual average right now, this time over the course of the last entire 12 months is about 6.6% that we're up. Now there's been some big jumps. Like for example, last month to this month, it's actually 10.5%.
What?
Those are some sexy numbers, right? But if it's just 6.6, you might look at that and go, I can maybe get a stock for 7 or 12 or whatever. But you factor in, and this is really your game, so I'll allow you to take the baton from me, but quantify simple interest, right? Tax deductible. Yeah. Might not be a lot of liquidity or safety, but I mean, the truth is you hold the mortgage, at least you get the rate of return on the dormant equity, and it's a place that you already have to live in anyway, so you're already going to be paying for shelter in the first place.
Right.
What'd I leave out?
I think the next thing that we're going to talk about, or the thing we're going to finish the show with rent,
right,
and the cost of not doing it.
And we'll buoy that.
Yeah.
I definitely want to tease that to the end, because that's probably the most staggering lesson that we learned from 2015. Definitely something to lean on. But for me, what comes up is, and you mentioned the concept of planning, right? So if you look at the fact that the rates are on their way up, and I'm going to let you tease that out too, because you're going to talk about the Fed hiking the rates, I think it was like a week or two ago, and what that's going to do possibly to the effective mortgage-backed securities, the rates you can get a 30-year loan at. For us, it's all about planning, and that's why we offer the home buyer class, right? Because, I mean, if you think about it, proper planning prevents poor performance, right? The 6 Ps. So if you look at the variables. And we've actually dissected this conversation down, and we found that there are 12, what you might call the most important variables when looking for shopping a home. And we break that into a Likert scale where you actually grade them and you rank them for yourself. We call it our smart home process. And we walk through that not only in the home buyer class, but also when you get out and do what we call the BBKOT, right? Big, bad kickoff tour.
Right.
And which is hated by my peers and loved by my clients, right? And we talk about all this stuff. But most importantly, though, when you distill that down, you get into what are the 3 habits of successful home buyers? And I'll share with you, number 1 and 2 we'll talk about in the class, but number 3, which is the hardest thing of all, is disengaging, right? And like you mentioned in the first segment about the whole process being very emotional. And you have to have a plan for that whole thing to work so you can separate yourself from the conversation just for that little smidgen of lightened consciousness to work its way in where you can use some of these strategies to your favor. And
I can tell you from someone who's in this business and someone who's bought a home recently in the last few years, it's easier to hear you say that. Like, I couldn't listen to this radio show and be like, oh, yeah, I'll just detach myself emotionally and go through that process. You need a coach. And hopefully your professionals on your side are able to guide you through that process, which is, it's not just like a mantra. It's not just a badge that you're going to wear when you go. It's someone who's standing there having that conversation with you and emotionally guiding you through that process so that they can consistently remind you about the things that you've talked about in those initial meetings. That's why we do the mortgage planning consultation. That's why you guys do the initial consultation. That's why those things are super important, because when you need that detachment, you've got to have somebody who already intimately knows those things with you.
And if you're not quite ready for an initial consultation where you're sitting down and talking about your plan being enacted, in the maybe immediate future, the homebuyer class is the next best thing. So what I would recommend, if this message is finding you guys right now and you're thinking about these numbers, you're thinking about maybe the fact that you might have left $149,000 on the table over the last 2 years, you're thinking about the fact that rents are actually on the rise and wondering where you fit into that whole brew, homebuyer class might be where you start. And if that's you, I'd recommend going over to thegreenhousegroupinc.com/HBC. And again, that's thegreenhousegroupinc.com/HBC to get you signed up on our next class. We do one a month.
Yep.
Right there in Greenhouse Group headquarters. It's free, obviously. You're welcome to bring a friend, and you're going to get probably not only some of the best lessons you could take forward with you. And that's the thing, too. It's not a how-to class. It's a what not to do class, which a lot of people love. And then you'll get some resources that are absolutely incredible. So anyway, gang, again, one last time, thegreenhousegroupinc.com/HBC. Jeremy, coming up, my man. So if you think about this year in review, you talked about seasons, talked about time in the market, talked about prices literally through the roof, especially over the last 2 years, the potential cost of waiting. What about the economy? There's some definite questions right now about a local economy. Is this sustainable? Or is this little markup of $149,000 last year a bubble? So we're going to hash into that, gang, coming up right after the CBS Sports Minute. I feel like the dip, Steve, is done. And I love our guys at CBS going to be talking about that. So we'll be right back, gang. Real Talk Radio San Diego. Thanks for hanging out.